Welcome everybody to part two of quite possibly the longest vlog slash many other things thinger majinger possible. So this part will cover sort of at 2 degree, maybe a little bit of a continuation of the homage to history, talk about some of that stuff, but more so talking about different things that are coming up with the channel and going from there. So thank you as always, and I hope you guys enjoy what's to come. It really is a part. Uh, I'm hoping to do my friend Tony sent me a video on John Henry or a thing on the John Henry statue that's down in, I believe, Virginia or West Virginia. He was actually a real person. Now, there's a lot of myth that goes with him, but I'd like to get the folk tales going back. We did Pecos Bill, we did Johnny Appleseed. I was planning on doing John Henry next, and I just never got to him. But those are series that I can do for the days that I can't get out. Like today, it's now raining a little bit, thunderstorms, but it was like 95 and like a heat index of 105. I can't be out in that. It doesn't work well. So I'm hoping tomorrow the temperatures are good. And we can enjoy that event, because I would like to show you guys the early stuff that they do, which we haven't gotten to do. And since I'm not doing the Daniel Fisher event, which was always on Saturdays, I'm actually going to we visited on Sundays, and not as much as there. There were a couple things we missed the last time just because it was getting difficult. I'm going to take my cart with me. I'm also going to take a seat so I can sit down regularly. I'm also going to take a bunch of bottles of water and things like that are in. I have a cooler thing that I'm keeping myself well hydrated so I can actually last through this entire event. And then I can show you guys again, because I think last year we did not do the actual battle. I want to do that this year again, so you guys can see that I want to do both lines. I want to do the special events. I want to do the museum again. There's an older gentleman that has been doing this for years now, and as long as everything's all right with him, he'll be back again. So I want to show you guys that again, because it's just such a neat bit of history, seeing uniforms and things like that. There's a bunch of other events. Sharon and I went to Gettysburg to do a sort of a prelim trip, because we're going to do a sort of scavenger hunt thing with the kids and Josh, and maybe some other people are going to come with. We should have done the battlefield first, but that was my mistake, and my leg didn't handle doing the National Cemetery first. I want to get a bunch of other information and maybe look for a couple other soldiers, because we found the one grave in the Massachusetts section of the National Cemetery for the Battle of Gettysburg. There are actually 2 Confederate troops buried in Massachusetts. I think there's 2 in Pennsylvania, 2 in Connecticut, and then 1 in Maryland. So I'd like to see if I can find the names, and then maybe we can search for a couple of them. Pennsylvania area is very, very big. Massachusetts isn't as big, a little easier to find stuff. Connecticut is much smaller. Of course, Maryland is much smaller as well. It'd be cool to recognize those individuals that are buried, because Confederate soldiers were not supposed to be buried in the National Cemetery. That was just supposed to be Union cemeteries. There were Confederate troops buried throughout the battlefield, wherever they fell. Now, most of them in 1871 through 1873, they got reinterred to the South. But they're still finding to this very day graves. And they're leaving them be. They don't know necessarily who's all in them, but they're going to let the dead rest in peace. But there were 9 that were mistaken. And there's also a bunch in the unknown section. A number of people talked about, some of the different chat rooms that I've read up on this have said they know family members are buried in the unknown section or somewhere on that battlefield, because they were killed there, but they were never brought back. And sometimes it's as simple as they couldn't be recognized because they got hit with like grape shot, and a lot of times you got hit by that, there was nothing left of you. I mean, what was there was minimal, and there's no way to. With modern technology, you could, but back then they just didn't have that to be able, unless and at that time as well, They didn't do the type of tagging with the dog tags and things like that. So a lot of times soldiers, because they didn't want their families not, they would put their name, clip it inside their uniform and stuff like that, and that's how a lot of those guys got identified then. Uh, but because their great fear was that their family wouldn't ever get their body, and it was, if it wasn't getting killed outright, it was disease that would get you, because it wasn't until Clara Barton sort of changed the way we did, and the Civil War was the start of that. A lot more guys died of disease, with the amputations. They just weren't, the cleanliness wasn't there, and it's a shame, and like what they truly suffered. And I was talking with, went up to Twin Pines camp yesterday with Jeff Berger, my pastor, and he had said they had done, we were talking about some of the military stuff, and he said, you just don't think about it. When you hear the term veteran, you think of somebody, an old person that dies in their own home or hospital. Those were the guys that came back home. But the guys that died in war, they were veterans. And he had one of his college students who's 23, because they had one particular grave there, the guy that had been killed during war was 23. You just don't think about the veterans in these wars. A lot of them were young kids. My dad was 18, 19 when he went over into the Pacific as a Marine. Now thankfully he came back, but like his best friend Arthur Langell, which we visited his grave, I think he was only 21 or 22 when he got killed on D-Day, and they had a whole life ahead of them. They should have been fathers, husbands, grandfathers. They should have had that whole thing to look forward to. Instead, they knowingly, they were willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice because there was a duty. Talk about certain towns, there were guys that were 4F, which meant that they physically did not meet the requirements. Whether it could be something as simple as asthma, they would not take you. If you had really bad teeth, they wouldn't necessarily always take you, because there's gum diseases and things that came with that. I have scoliosis with the curvature of the spine. I would never have been accepted. Some of those guys were so distraught by the fact that they were not able to serve like their brothers and friends that they killed themselves. It's a different time. They wanted to serve. I love the one line from the first Captain America movie, and they did it. The reason I love that movie so much, probably my favorite Marvel movie, is yes, there's a lot of nonsense with Hydra and the ridiculous weapons they had and all that stuff, but the idea behind the soldiering, behind the men themselves, was spot on. And he said, one of the questions that the scientist asked him, do you want to kill Nazis? He's a German scientist. And he's like, I don't want to kill anybody. He's like, you're not asking me, do you want to kill Nazis? And he's like, I don't want to kill anybody. I don't like bullies. And when you have a bully that stands up and starts tormenting, good men need to stand up. Good women need to stand up and fight against that oppression. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the thought process, especially with more modern war. There can be debated certain reasons why we're in places that maybe we shouldn't be and stuff like that. But you can never question the American soldier. They have sacrificed over and over and over again for those that they do not know, because that is one of the core principles of what makes us who we are. We have our faults. Lord knows there is a lot of history there that is not great. But we also have stepped up in times and truly paid the consequence with young lives and blood and sacrifice to make sure the world's a better place. And, we've had several videos that we've done where we've talked about, the first Minnesota, if they hadn't made that charge in the Battle of Gettysburg on the second day and it suffered 83% casualties, we would probably live in a very different world, because America would have been two separate countries. Maybe by World War I, World War II, we would have seen the reason of joining back up. But what if we hadn't? We would not have been strong enough. And whatever divisions would have been there, maybe one of the countries would have said, we're not going. There's no reason to. Just those moments in time, you look at Pearl Harbor, how that really changed. If it had not happened, when it had happened, how it had happened, and the different things that happened within that attack, we'd live in a very different world. In every single one of these circumstances, wherever you look at in history, these monumental moments that really changed the course of history, it required sacrifice, great sacrifice. And that's why we do the Homage to History series. That's why we do the Memories of Hometown Heroics, and showcase a lot of these different places, these little memorials in tiny towns like Branchdale, where even in a small town like that, which back then in that period they would have been much larger because the coal industry was still alive. It was dying, but it was still alive. So these towns were much larger than they are now. The sacrifice in those small villages was extraordinary. And everybody knew each other. And we talk about the Daniel Fisher experience, like Myerstown Time of War. One of the moments in there is going down the main street, and you had businesses and homes and things like that, and say there's a mother. The worst fear was to become a Gold Star mother, because you'd have these hanging in the window where they were blue stars on this sort of white background. And that was, whether you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sons in the war, you had the stars to symbolize that. The worst fear is when a son was killed, it would go from being a blue star to a gold star. And it was the absolute fear of every mother, that your son wouldn't come home, at least not the way you were hoping. And so she's there, she has one of those things, and she has 1 or 2 sons. And the greatest fear was to see a black sedan come driving up, out would step 2 Army officers. They would take hat in hand, put it underneath, and walk up slowly on behalf of a grateful nation. We regret to inform you, your son, Johnny Walker, was killed at Monte Cassino, Iwo Jima, D-Day. We thank you for your son's sacrifice. And the wail that came out of her could come from the soul, falling to her knees, and everybody stopped that was walking on the street. Women made a step forward because they wanted to console her, but they knew maybe it wasn't quite the moment. And also that fear crept into them, is my son next? You think about things like, the men, there were these places where news was shared, but also the news, you remember, Johnny so-and-so. Boy, he used to run up and down these streets like a banshee, screaming and scaring the crap out of the old ladies. He had that dry wit, that stinker twinkle in his eye. He was up to no good, but he really was going to go somewhere. He had that beautiful, toothy grin. And in an instant, the twinkle in the eye, the dry wit, the toothy smile, the nix nooksy we say here in Pennsylvania Dutch, is that nix nooksy, whippersnapper. It was gone, never to be seen again. You had your memories, but I think the scariest thing when you lose somebody, and we've all gone through this, is you start to lose parts of them. What did their voice sound like? Just how they looked, the smile. Like my mom, I always talk about the stinker twinkle. Those are the things that are a continual sorrow. And thankfully, I have some videos of her that I took. I also have voice messages that I shared with you guys that are some of my, if not my greatest treasures that I have. And you don't have any preparation in times of war. One moment there's the hope that they're still here and that they're going to come back, and the next they're gone. And that's why it's so important that we take care of their tombstones, these memorials to them. I love how I think it's Lady Taffos says it. These are more than a name inscribed on a stone. That is a person's life, their last memory. It is a memorial that they lived a life and were loved. And we need to remember that. We need to be able to put names to faces. There's so much importance in remembering our past and those that have come before us, because we would not be who we are if it was not for them and the journeys that they took. The trials and tribulations, the triumphs, the joys, the sorrows. There are stories for hours and days, months, years that can be told of a life. You know, a cemetery is more than just a place of remembrance. It's more than a place of serenity. It's a documentation and a celebration of life, of what came before us. And what isn't necessarily gone if we remember. And that's the importance of history. It's his story, her story, it's our story. It's really, at the end of the day, it's the core of what makes us who we are. And it needs to be preserved. And that's what we try to do. All these amazing people that do this type of work, they're not doing it for likes. Most of them aren't. I mean, there's occasionally I've seen a couple that sort of tick me off a little bit because I think they're a little disrespectful. There's one person that sort of kicks a ball, and wherever it lands, I do that. And then the scrubbing effort that's made, there needs to be, it's like I took a picture about silence and respect of a sign they have at the Lincoln Memorial for the Gettysburg Address. And they talk about silence and respect. This is a place of respect. You don't hop around, giggle, take pictures on the line on the stones. Show some respect. And the vast majority of that's what they're doing. That's why they're there. But you do occasionally have, and that's sort of, I gave thumbs downs on some of those because it was like just ignorant. It's not, you just don't do that. And that's why you have to have certain cemetery rules, because and that's more probably towards urban areas where you have those issues. But I've seen people do things that you're just sort of like, And it's just a question of, is it bad enough that you have a confrontation or not? And even there, you're sort of like, is that an appropriate place to have it? But I wanted to show you guys this next cool stuff that I got here, because I'm really excited about what we're going to be doing. We will be making return trips to Millersburg. At some point, we're going to take a trip to the ferry. We also want to go to Strasburg Railroad to not only take the train ride, but also go to the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum. I'm excited to see Jackson's reaction. Josh and Sharon's son, he loves, like all little boys, trains, automobiles, tractors, broom, rawr, rawr, rawr. War to a degree, cowboys, Indians. That's sort of the thing that we gravitate towards a lot of times. And he's so excited to be able to actually be able to walk up in some of these really neat trains, because that's one of the cool things that you can do. And it makes history come alive. It's just such a neat thing, and you can spend your time in there and just experience that. I'm looking forward to seeing his excitement over that type of stuff. And then when we do the Gettysburg, I hope the Borg aren't there, but the Gettysburg tour, we're going to do the battlefield first, look at how my leg reacts, and then maybe do a National Cemetery another day, or we'll try to do whatever. But I want to be able to tell the story. I'd like them to be able to see the cyclorama, because that is such an amazing display. The video that they do with that. I remember the old school one that was done when the visitor center was right down there. I believe it was at the National Cemetery, if I'm remembering correctly. It was that or in town almost. I remember that one. I haven't been to the new one. We went to the visitor center, Sharon and I, to get maps, so we had a better idea. And I think it was because of the confusion with the maps. National Cemetery is the first thing that came up, even though they tell you do that last. I'm glad we did it because we found Arthur Lingle's grave, found J.L. Johnson, who's one of the Confederate soldiers. Got to see a number of the really neat monuments, and then I was able to explain and tell Sharon about the outer edges that I think they go through, maybe Korea, maybe Vietnam, but I think it's Korea. But a lot of World War I, World War II vets are buried there, and including my dad's best friend, Arthur Lingle, from World War II. And it's just such a surreal experience, and just being there, acknowledging the sacrifice and all those things. Just some of the beautiful signs that they have with quotations, that are from, some of them from as far back as Revolutionary War. I think one of them was by John Adams. And it just, the way they describe it with the eloquence, really, there's a thing that with the Daniel Fisher event, there's a poem, and I sort of take something like, they shall not grow weary as we shall grow weary. They shall not grow old as you and I shall grow old. They shall walk upon the grass, but they shall not make sound nor imprint. But we, like the wind, shall know that they are there. They shall never be forgotten, for the deeds that they have done will be remembered always. And one day they will turn in that uniform, dirtied, torn, and bloodied, for one of white. We shall remember them. And I think it's so important to eloquence of moments like that, just to let it sit in, that their memory is still here, and it needs to remain here. And, visiting these town honor rolls, seeing the generations of different towns, like Myerstown was one, because I lived there for 15 years, you could see generation after generation that served. And some of those generations were killed in war. And it really makes you think. So I want to thank you guys for coming along. This got a little bit further in than I was expecting. I always say, the vlog, those things, it's only going to be like 5 minutes, and it winds up being like 3 hours. This one's probably a good half hour or more. But I think it's a good essential thing to be able to show you some aspects of the channel, how we're progressing, some of the events that we're doing coming up, some of the plans, things that I find very exciting that are coming up for the channel. It's just a matter for me, and I know everybody has said, from Colleen to, everybody has just, you need to pace yourself. You need to take care of yourself first and foremost, and make sure you're not pushing yourself too far. And I appreciate everybody looking out for me, and I am certainly trying to do that. I'm trying to put out the content that I can, but I'm also trying to deal with the issues that I have. And I'm hoping, as things progress here, hopefully in the next month, and we can come up with a plan, there can be a better certainty. And hopefully by next year, we can do our first YouTuber meet and greet event in Millersburg at the ferry. And there's just so much cool history, so many cool things in that local area that families can do. And I think also as things progress, there's going to be some really neat events and opportunities that present themselves that I'll be excited to show. And the one last thing I will note, they had on the 22nd, I was not able to make it. I think it was from 4 to 6. They had at the Lebanon Expo Center, which Lebanon Fair is this week. I can't walk terribly far, and I wound out, they were doing a thing on the Donamore Mansion. I think as well, either with the Lebanon School Board or one of the, I think, grandsons of Alexander Patch, the Lieutenant General, Sandy, he spoke about the significance of this building and everything. And there's a lot of people like, yeah, we need to save it. And then you have the people that have sort of the reason a lot of areas don't take care of things the way they should and preserve history is sort of like, but blah, 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 naysayer, naysayer, naysayer. It's like, listen, you lose something of your community when you tear these places down. It needs to be saved. There is also the connection with an extraordinary military family that has served. I'm going to do a video on them because Lebtown did a great article on the family through the generations, from Alexander Patch Sr., who served out west, I think in Oklahoma Territory, and so like that, and actually lost a leg, I believe, because of an injury that was had with a fight with a Comanche or something like that. And then his sons, who became generals World War I and World War II, and Sandy, who was the most famous of them, was the one that was a lieutenant general in the Pacific and was especially important to the campaign with Guadalcanal. And then their sons continued that tradition of military service, and several that actually passed in the service. And that was something I didn't know, and I think that needs to be acknowledged, their history. So on the 29th, they're going to have Lebanon PA 250. They're meeting at the Expo Center. I will be making that. We also are going to start seeing the first videos by August 1st of Lebanon PA 250, or part of the Greater America 250. I want to do an introduction to the series itself, the reason we're doing it, and then we'll be filming over at Old Hanover Presbyterian Churchyard to talk about the Hanover Resolve, to sort of start everything off of, the idea of the Declaration of Independence, and this was the first document of that kind right there in Hanover Township. So a lot of cool stuff coming with the channel. I want to thank you as always for coming along with this journey and supporting the channel and myself. And as always, we'll see you on our next journey. History is out there, my friends, and we'll see you all about town. So thank you once again, as always, for coming along on another vlog adventure. I thought it was only a half an hour, and then I looked at it and it was like, whew, it's 52 minutes. Covered a lot of things in this. I like to ramble like I'm doing now. Next couple days, we're going to have the World War II weekend video at Schaeferstown, Alexander Schaefer's farm. Then we're going to have at least a two-parter, if not a three-parter, on Gettysburg. Sharon and I went up there 2 separate days to check out what's going to be, in essence, a tour of Battlefield and some other really cool places like Lincoln Cemetery. We did not visit Lincoln Cemetery this time. It's a really neat African-American cemetery in Gettysburg town itself. We stopped by to find it because I want to do more research on that. Also, probably do a little bit of a tour around Evergreen Cemetery because that's absolutely stunning. But anyways, we have that coming up. We have one for the National Cemetery itself, and then possibly 2 for, depending on how the length, on the battlefield. And then there will be a bunch of other videos coming up as well over the next couple weeks. So we got a lot of cool stuff coming up, including the beginning of Lebanon PA 250, which that may be released in hopefully the next 2 days. It just depends on how much filming I can get out, because I'm going to be visiting about 15 locations around Lebanon County to sort of start this series and also acknowledge what it's about. So as always, I want to say thank you for coming along, and we'll see you all about town.